Welcome to Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors, where we believe Benjamin Franklin's advice that an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, both in finances and in your life. Every episode teaches you personal finance and long-term investing in simple terms. Now, here's your host, Jesse Kramer.
Welcome to Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors, episode 120. I'm Jesse Kramer. By day, I work at a fiduciary wealth management firm helping clients nationwide. You can learn more at bestinterest.blog/work. The link is in the show notes. And by night, I write the Best Interest blog and I host this podcast. I put out a weekly email newsletter as well, all of which help busy professionals and retirees avoid mistakes and grow wealth by simplifying their investing, their taxes, and their retirement planning. Later today, Professor John Dinsmore will be joining me to talk about marketing and advertising and debt, and some really intriguing conversation about how debt and loans and financing and other somewhat risky financial behaviors get sold and get pushed on people like you and me. But first, we'll do a review of the week. This one is from AB17, who says, "Exceptional and essential personal finance podcast. I stumbled onto Jesse's podcast, and from the very first one I listened to, I gained so much knowledge. Jesse has a fantastic, easy-to-listen-to voice, and his delivery is spot on. I love the topics, and it keeps me motivated to do better with my portfolio. Jesse's advice is based on sound financial principles. I respect this guy. At his core, in addition to whatever talents he possesses, he has the heart of a teacher, and the AMAs are fantastic." Well, AB17, thank you for the kind words. You're right. I'm not sure what talents I possess, but whatever they are, both my parents were teachers, as I've talked about here on the podcast before, and I'm glad that maybe that teaching gene comes across in these podcasts. So AB17, shoot me an email to jesse@bestinterest.blog, and I'll get you hooked up with a super soft podcast t-shirt. Before Professor Dinsmore joins us, let me tell you why I am weak. I'm weak, and on average, I might bet that you have some weakness too. And I wrote what I'm about to read. I wrote it in 2022, and the title of this article is "I Am Weak, So Are You." The more I admit my weakness, the better I become, and you might be the same way. So here's an example. YouTube works on me. I can waste hours on YouTube. YouTube knows the stuff I like to watch. It feeds me as much as I'll consume. And when we think about that fact, we might draw back a little bit and say like, ew. And Twitter, when I was on Twitter worked on me too. So did Facebook. My Facebook timeline was littered with foster dog stories. Get it? Littered with foster dogs. The YouTube and Twitter and Facebook, they learned my weaknesses. That is, in other words, how to manipulate my brain and how to keep my attention. And their techniques worked against me. I am weak against them. I'm weak against their techniques. Here's a crazy stat. At current rates, the average person, and hey, that might be you, the average person will spend 6 years of their life scrolling through social media. Sugar works on me too, and so does salt and so does fat. The food industry knows how to make food as appetizing as possible, and my taste buds and my brain chemistry are victims of that fact, or at least we're weak against that fact, whether I'm a victim or not. And here's another stat. 74% of US adults over the age of 20 are overweight or obese, based on the sometimes maligned BMI or body mass index. My BMI is 28, 29, 30, depending on the day. I'm overweight. I am overweight. And my ego wants to believe that I'm strong enough to overcome the addictive allure of social media or the addictive allure of a sugar-stuffed food. I want to say something like, how can those people waste all that time on social media? How can those people shovel that junk food into their faces? But I am those people, right? Big social media and big food. Their tactics work on me. I am the patsy that they had in mind. Can I be blamed for this? Well, armies of programmers and psychologists design social media platforms, and armies of chemists and food scientists find the optimal levels of sugars and salt and fat in the foods they design. What hope does a simple man like me have against that? If I'd known I'd get addicted or taken advantage of, maybe I would have avoided the stuff in the first place. But I'll say this. Knowing my weakness, being aware of my weakness helps out immensely. If I waste an hour watching dog videos, I don't ask what the hell just happened. I know exactly what happened. I recognize my weakness. I was weak against them and I kind of fell victim to them again. I ought to know better. I know that I need to recognize my triggers and catch myself early in the act. But okay, what does this have to do with the world of personal finance? Well, marketing and advertising must work too. Since my monkey brain falls prey to social media and unhealthy food, I know I'm getting led along or tricked or at least convinced by advertising and marketing too. I must be, I'm sure of it. My ego, of course, wants to think that I've armored myself against the slings and arrows of a marketer's arsenal. But let's be honest, if the experts have outgunned me on social media and food, then the marketers are probably winning too. It's only logical. But unlike with social media and food, I don't know exactly how I'm getting tricked. Advertising and marketing can be subtle, indistinct, sometimes hidden in plain sight. You can believe that you're immune to marketing, and you can claim that your purchasing decisions are always of your own accord, but the data show differently. Here's another stat. The average person sees 1,700 online advertisements, like banner ads, per month. Do you think you ignore all 1,700 of those ads? Why do you buy Nike shoes? Why do you shop at Whole Foods? Why is Iceland on top of your travel list? You might not know why, but somewhere a marketer is probably smiling. Do you really know how marketing affects your spending habits? Now, what can we do about that? If we want to fight back against the constant onslaught of advertising, it's an uphill battle. Go ahead and Google something like how to fight against marketing techniques. Go Google it. Almost all of the top results are actually pro-marketing articles, like 11 ways to sell anything to any audience. In other words, tons of people are working on better ways to sell you junk. Very few people are trying to help you buy less junk. This battle really is up to you and me. I'm here to help too, but it's up to us on an individual basis. There aren't that many people who are really gathering groups of people together to fight on our side. Nevertheless, here are a few quick ideas to fight back against incessant marketing. The first one, unsubscribe from any email you don't want, including my emails. Email marketing is incredibly effective. Don't let a brand sneak into your inbox and into your brain every day or every week or something like that. The second tip, look at advertising critically. Rather than observing an ad like a patsy, I watch ads like an investigator or a scientist. I try to break down the advertisement and hopefully develop some sort of on-the-fly defense against it. I ask, what exactly are they trying to sell and how are they trying to convince me to buy it? The third thing you can do, review old purchases. Was that purchase worthwhile? If not, do you think that advertising or marketing maybe played a role in convincing you to make that purchase? And the fourth one, ask, what am I paying for? A popular fashion company sells leggings for $100 a pair. Well, what are you paying for? You're paying for an image of elitism and maybe sexiness, and that image was created by marketing. And I bet some of you know exactly what legging brand I'm referring to. And that fact alone proves how marketing works. That's brand awareness. And I'll ask you, if you have any interesting techniques against advertising and marketing, by all means, please reach out. Share them with me, jesse@bestinterest.blog. So there's nothing wrong with weakness. We're all weak in our own unique ways. I am weak, so are you. But recognizing that weakness, that is a strength. To plug a leak, you first have to identify the leak. And that's what we're doing here today. Or keep on eating Cheetos in your sexy leggings because, those dog videos won't watch themselves. Either way, I think this is a really interesting idea we're talking about, and John Dinsmore and I are about to talk about it a little bit more. Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. Did you know my written blog, The Best Interest, was nominated for 2022 Personal Finance Blog of the Year, and it's been highlighted in the Wall Street Journal, Yahoo Finance, and on CNBC? I love writing, especially when that writing is to share financial education, and I usually write 1 or 2 articles per week. You can read them all at bestinterest.blog. Again, the web address is bestinterest.blog. Check it out. Professor John Dinsmore is a leading scholar in behavioral finance and marketing and advertising, exploring how individuals make financial decisions and the psychological factors behind them. His research bridges theory and practice, offering actionable insights for everyone from retirees to policymakers to financial planners, seeking to understand decision-making, nudges, and long-term financial well-being. So without further ado, here's Professor John Dinsmore. John, I read an article about you saying that you want to, help consumers recognize when financial decisions are being influenced by clever marketing. So let's start there. What are some of these clever marketing things going on that we're maybe not even aware of?
I think a lot of times all of us would agree with the statement that advertising works. Probably not all of us would agree with the statement that advertising works on us. The tricky thing about persuasion is that you don't really know all the time that you're being persuaded when you are. It's going to get more and more difficult with AI becoming the engine of everything, of getting these highly adaptive ads that are based on not someone who meets your profile, but on you, your search history, any ads you've clicked on, any of your prior purchases. So I think, and especially when it comes to finance, it's going to be something very difficult to navigate because a lot of us don't fully understand finance, but if we're buying it more and more online, whether it's car loans, mortgages, whatever, credit cards, We really need to be careful. And I think that AI in particular, and maybe driving consumer finance to where the classroom is going now, which is more and more offline, because so many of the AI tools are so good that, I and a lot of my colleagues are reverting exams to being, paper and pencil, not being able to take them online and that sort of thing. And that may be where consumers need to go when it comes to shopping for, well, anything, but also in particular finance.
Yeah, really interesting. You mentioned a word there, adaptive ads, which, I can think to myself when I go watch a YouTube video, I recognize the fact that I'm being served an ad for some product in my search history. I kind of realize there's something being specifically targeted at me, the individual. I mean, is that what you mean by an adaptive ad, or is it even more kind of crazy and dystopian than that?
If you saw Blade Runner 2049, there's a scene after Ryan Gosling is coming back from just getting the hell beat out of him. And then like a 10-story holographic image of his AI girlfriend starts pitching him some product. I mean, I think we will get more sophisticated about this too. I mean, my kids are constantly saying, oh, well, that's AI, and they're quicker to pick it out than I am. But no, I think it's, in some cases like today, there are going to be some things where you're like, okay, that's very creepy. I feel spied on. And then in other cases, I think AI will adapt enough to become less identifiable, to create more subtleties and things. So you have a harder time knowing that, oh, this is based on my Amazon account or whatever.
Zooming out even a little bit further, and this is going back to your first answer, you mentioned this idea that most of us are aware that we're being advertised to, that we're being persuaded. Most of us are aware that it works on somebody, but very few of us are willing to admit that it works on us. And I feel like I've heard that statement in some form mentioned before, and I'm aware that that's kind of part of the whole advertising industry. But do you have any concrete examples of that even if it's more traditional advertising than modern advertising, of just the fact that whether you realize it or not, this stuff probably is working on you?
Right. I mean, I know for me, and I think my wife has finally gotten me to stop. I would sometimes buy these weird novel contraptions. We were having some drain flies in our kitchen. I don't know if you've ever had drain flies in your kitchen. It's not great. They are what they sound like. These little fruit fly size insects that if you haven't cleaned out your drain, they end up making a home there. And it's totally gross. But probably because I had forgotten to turn my microphone off on my Instagram, or I start getting pitched all these almost like infomercial type of bug trap things. And there have been some other things as well. So I am acutely aware, and my wife is acutely aware, that I am susceptible to advertising. But the adage about advertising is what? It's the right offer to the right person at the right time. I mean, there's probably another plank in that, which is so long as they don't know you've been spying on them. But in the case of the bug traps or some other things that I bought, clearly social media has caught me when I was in the mood to buy something and pitched me the right product.
Well, this is a good transition then, because I think I pulled this quote, I think from something I saw that you wrote, which is that marketing tactics, deliberately or not, exploit biases and blind spots when it comes to evaluating debt. In this specific case you were talking about, the marketing of financial products, the marketing of loans and debt and that kind of thing. What biases or blind spots are we talking about here? And how do these specific marketing tactics exploit our biases and blind spots?
Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of them, right? So I would say if you look into, there's one of the biggest biases is something called loss aversion, right? So the authors of that, Kahneman and Tversky, they won a Nobel Prize for it. They've had books written about them. And it's really just that we hate losing much more than we love winning. And when you put that into a financial context, a lot of times we will buy a lot of things like extra add-on services like extended warranties and things like that because we're so afraid of making the wrong decision or a losing decision that we become very susceptible to that. So, my wife's car a couple of years ago just up and died. We were having lunch and we looked out in the parking lot and there was fluids all over the parking lot, and we had it towed in and it was pronounced dead on the scene. And so we had to go get a car, right? We went and shopping for, the big sort of family SUV we had was a very comfortable car. It was awful in terms of reliability. So I think we went to a brand that had a strong reputation for reliability. Of course, we're hearing how reliable it is the whole time during the sales pitch. And the moment we commit to buying it, they pivot into, well, but it doesn't mean it's foolproof. And this thing could blow up and it could really cost you, right? It was like 20 seconds ago, you were telling me how reliable this thing. And now you're convincing me that doom is right around the corner. But it is, the car is the second biggest purchase most of us ever make, right? So naturally, we're going to be extra cautious about that. And so a lot of us end up buying extended warranties and that sort of thing. On my car the last car I got, I remember they said, well, we can spray it with a protective coating. And I think they wanted like $1,000 for it. And I had actually I traveled a bit to get the car because I found it on what I thought was a good deal. And I said, well, okay, but how long would that take? And they're like, oh, it takes like 5 minutes. And I was like, well, if it takes 5 minutes, why does it cost $1,000? Right. But in that case, I declined. But there have been other times where I've definitely bought tack-on insurance and warranties and that sort of thing because, I am very loss averse.
Yeah, I just think about, right, every Amazon purchase now, especially I think for maybe it's like electronics, I feel like they usually while you're checking out, don't you want this extended warranty? Right. Travel now usually comes with some sort of travel insurance add-on pitch they're trying to make to you. And specifically, John, most of the listeners here to this podcast are DIYers in their financial lives, maybe even like thinking about retirement through a bit of a DIY lens. And I think immediately of annuities. I don't know how familiar you are with annuity products as part of retirement planning, but it's basically this insurance-backed product that says, don't risk losing everything you've saved for retirement. Here's this steady protection that provides you guaranteed income. And when you really look at the underlying math, you say, oh, well, that probably isn't that appealing a deal. But it's sold as protect, protect, protect. Don't lose, right. Don't lose, don't lose. And just going back to that loss aversion. What else? I know Kahneman and Tversky were full of really interesting biases. Are there any others that really stick out?
There have been a bunch of things that, of course, they're giants in their field. And so there have been a bunch of offshoots for it. So another thing related to loss aversion is what you call like an anchoring effect. That typically people find the first piece of information that they see and they kind of block out anything else. A big reason for that is, we're asked to make decisions on a lot more things than would ever be capable to be an expert on. So in a lot of cases, especially if we're dealing with something that makes us a little anxious, like finance, a lot of times we they call it seizing and freezing, right? So you seize on the first piece of information that you find that you think gives you the answer you want, and you freeze out everything else. Well, when you're dealing with things like, loans and credit, that they usually have a lot of components to price. They may have escalation clauses. They may have all these things. People will seize on like an introductory interest rate. And then, they won't pay attention to anything else. It's like when people buy something online and they don't incorporate any shipping costs to it. If it's $50 plus, I don't know if you've ever done this where another example of maybe me being one of the bigger suckers out there, where you see a really attractive upfront price for something and you click on it. This thing's usually $80. They're advertising it for, $60 or $70. So you click on it. And then, of course, it's like $25 to ship it, which is absurd. But we do the same things with loans. We'll take that initial rate. And even if it's only good for a couple of months and then it escalates, that's what we encode as the price. And then we block out all these other things.
Have you looked into the buy now, pay later at all? Like this growing theme of services in the finance industry. There's a few companies that are now trying to outcompete each other to win that race. But I can go buy a $500 product on Amazon, not pay anything for 3 months, or maybe they just divide it into 10 months of even payments, and they're charging me some hidden interest rate in there. Any specific thoughts on that service?
Economists refer to something called intertemporal discounting, which is just like a really fancy way to say that depending whether if something is in the present or at some point in the future, we're going to look at it in different ways. If we push things off just a little bit into the future, we have a tendency to think it's way more affordable than it actually is. You combine this with the general sort of optimism that we have that, we're always going to have more time, money, and energy in the future than we have today, right? So even if it's only 3 or 6 months out, people are likely to think, well, I'm strapped for cash this month because, my car needs to get serviced. But there's lots of expenses like that every month. What you really need to think about is how many months do you end up the month and be like, wow, I've got all this money in my account? Probably not too many of us do, but we have a tendency to think of the future we will. When you push off payments for things like that, oh, this month I'm broke, but in a few months I'm going to have all this stuff sorted. And there's all these different expenses that creep into your life that you're not anticipating. So I think psychologically, that's why a buy now, pay later is really attractive to a lot of people, because they fool themselves into thinking that they're going to be able to afford it when they probably won't be able to.
How do we unfool ourselves? I mean, you gave some answer there about just like, you almost need to just be more realistic with yourself. But I love that fact. I wrote it down. We all think we're going to have more time, money, and energy in the future than we really do. And I can look back and say, yeah, there have been times before when I've assumed I'll be able to fundamentally change my life over the following 12 months. And then in retrospect, you look backward and say, I didn't quite hit my my high goal there. But are there in practice, is there anything we can or should be doing to just be a little bit more realistic with ourselves?
I've got 2 boys, 12 and 15. And I remember always thinking, as I've progressed through the parenting and the boys have grown, okay, well, I'm broke because we're paying for daycare. But once we're done paying for daycare, we'll be good. But then, of course, they're doing sports and all these other things and braces and all this stuff keeps coming. So I finally come to grips with being wrong so many times that it's really, in my mind, it's more the test of, where are we now in terms of, on most months, are we eking it out to get to the end of the month, or do we feel like we have some space there? And I think that's a better judge of where you are right now and where you've been recently versus trying to figure out where you'll be in the future. Because I once got laid off from a job. It was right around the Great Recession. I don't think anyone has that in the career path of, I'll have a layoff or two. And, I think half of all workers end up getting laid off at one point or another. We should assume we're going to get laid off at one point or another. But I think so. Yes, God willing, our ships come in for all of us in the future. But I think the present and the recent past is a better judge of where you'll be.
Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. I love getting your questions, and some of you ask me questions about the wealth management firm I work for in Rochester, New York. Others ask about the Best Interest blog and this podcast, Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors, which operate without advertising, without pushy sales, and with no paywalls. How can the blog and podcast stay afloat without me dumping my own money into it? Well, to answer both those questions, I want to point you to episode 78 of Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors. I intentionally recorded episode 78 to shine light on those topics and inform you how you are actually helping and can continue helping these projects carry forward. So if you've ever been curious about the business of my blog and podcast, or if you're curious about my day job in wealth management, please check out episode 78 and let me know what you think. So my wife and I yesterday, it was a Sunday, we had on our beloved Buffalo Bills on in the background.
Oh, hey, go
NFL,
Bills. Yeah.
Go Bills. And I heard what must have been my millionth advertisement for a sports gambling app. I mean, they're just ubiquitous, especially when you're watching live sports. They're ubiquitous. And I've on this podcast before gone deep on I'm kind of way out on the spectrum, I think, of disliking sports gambling and kind of what it does to us on a societal or just an individual level. But I'm curious, I see this very interesting confluence of what I would call a terrible financial behavior and a gigantic marketing machine that's trying to proliferate that behavior. And not to put you on the spot if you haven't dove too deep on it, but I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have any.
I think I align with you. If you're Charles Barkley and you've just got absurd amounts of money, and you want to go blow $500,000 in Vegas this weekend, God bless you. But most people don't have that kind of slack in their budget. But let's say you're one of the big gaming companies and we all see them advertising all over the place. So you've probably got, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of customers. So I doubt they're really getting in on people's profiles on an individual level. But at the same time, there have been issues that have come up in the news recently of, okay, you guys have been targeting sending more offers and bigger offers and incentives to people who clearly have a problem gambling. Now, if you're in the data center of one of these big gaming companies, you might just see it, hey, this is one of our best customers. So what's the difference between the best customer and someone who's ruining their life? And I think actually I personally think you could probably flag certain profiles and things like that. But I would guess in a competitive marketplace, gaming company one says, well, if we stop this person or discourage this person from gambling, they're probably just going to go to the next gaming company through the app. I mean, they can, if you have not set your privacy settings carefully, and most people don't, They know when you're near a sporting event, know when you're near one of their casinos, all of these things. And they also have all this extra data they've been able to compile on you through that app and other apps on your phone. So for certain goods, I have to put gaming near the top of goods that, when heavily armed with information in a digital environment, can really wreak havoc.
This is my total layperson's opinion, but just it seems the way that things are going in the marketing and advertising world, or just maybe when I think about this other broad issue of just like the social media kind of echo chamber / kind of addiction world of people just falling down these kind of bad paths in the social media world. It's that the service, whether it's a social media site or a gambling site or just an advertising agency, they know a lot more about you and they know a lot more about human brains than you do. And to some extent, we're all probably relatively powerless against them. But maybe not. I'm sure there are some hopeful things we can do. So maybe we can focus on that right now, John. Short of becoming a complete Luddite and getting rid of all your electronics, what are some other things that we can all start doing on an individual basis to at least become more aware of these ways in which we're being targeted?
Part of it is, check your settings for your different platforms and your different apps. I have found personally, now maybe I misjudged it, but I know I have found personally, I have set privacy settings for like a certain social media. And then when I update the app, it reverts to a default.
Oh boy.
So you have to be pretty vigilant about that stuff. And I think a big thing on, one of my favorite psychological tidbits is the people who are most biased in the world are people who think they aren't biased at all because they're not monitoring themselves and they're not adjusting for it. Instead of bias, let's talk about being vulnerable, where if you think you aren't vulnerable to this stuff, chances are that you are, because you have such a feeling that you are invincible on this stuff that you're going to be persuaded without knowing it. So I think if you can be, what do you call it in psychology, called self-monitoring, right? So if you can be sort of vigilant about your own vulnerability and then also try and keep platforms, whether it's your browser or your social media or various mobile apps, be vigilant about checking your privacy settings. I think that will help.
That's interesting. I feel there's a parallel there. I feel like sometimes some of the worst investor stories I hear are the people who are sure their system beats the market. Right. They're sure they're smarter than everyone else, or they're sure that they are kind of invulnerable to the things that befall the rest of us. And usually those are the people who maybe 1 in 100 of them actually are as smart as they think they are, but the other 99 aren't. But let's pivot. So I know your upcoming book is all about specifically the marketing of debt. Yes. And many retirees or many, the kind of pre-retirees who might be listening are probably a little wary of taking on new debt. So that's a good thing. Sure. But because they maybe are a little more asset rich, they've been saving for many decades, they still tend to be heavily targeted towards debt products. I'm thinking of credit cards. Reverse mortgages are a big one that tend to cover target retirees rather. Maybe some sort of medical financing to help alleviate the fear of future medical costs. So I'm thinking I want to pivot a message a little bit directly toward those current or future retirees. If you have any thoughts, it sounded like reverse mortgages were something you were pretty aware of. Maybe we can start with that, or just any thoughts you have on what retirees should be aware of.
I'm not especially, more versed than the average person on reverse mortgages, other than, I guess I'm in my 50s, so I have my mom's retired, my mother-in-law's, and I have colleagues who have recently retired. One of them actually we took him out to lunch and he spent the whole time talking about reverse mortgages. Yeah. I will say, as far as targeting seniors, seniors are, among the most exploited populations out there, right? My mother-in-law, we lost my father-in-law a couple of years ago. And my mother-in-law's doing great. She has a very, she's in South Florida, as you might expect, but it is very active social life. She's doing really well. But, on Facebook, she's getting targeted by more 25-year-old Italian princes who just are looking for the company of a single woman in her 70s, right? And thankfully, my mother-in-law is pretty shrewd. She's not going for any of this, but she has friends who have fallen for these things, right? So whether it's an Italian prince in his 20s or it's different financial products that are being pitched hard to you, I think it's these old truisms. If it seems to be too good to be true, it is. I think the other thing is, most people with finance, if you don't think you understand or you have enough information, get help. from a friend or a family member who works in finance, because studies have shown financial understanding or the effects of financial education fade over time. If you're not steeped in it and you can feel yourself like, well, I think it's okay, slow things down. Like if you're dealing with someone who's not going to allow you extra time to make a decision, you don't want to be working with that person anyways. But I think get the help you need. I mean, especially as seniors who are being targeted for this stuff more so than a lot of the rest of us.
I can think of a couple examples in my kind of tenure here working at a financial planning firm where I feel like I've failed clients is because only after the fact, a client came to me and said, hey, Joe, just by the way, last month I did X, Y, and Z, and I just figured you would want to know that just to, so on your end, so we're all on the same page. And I kind of think back and I go, oh, I really wish you had told me about X, Y, and Z beforehand. Thankfully, It hasn't been fraud. It hasn't been buying some awful product. It hasn't been like a 5-figure mistake, but it might have been a $500 mistake. And still, just the idea of having someone in your life, again, whether it's a trusted family member, whether it's a fiduciary, hopefully advisor, anything like that, so your accountant, someone to bounce these questions off of, a third party just to help you with some of that decision making can be huge. But let's transition, John. A few minutes left. Let's talk a little bit more specifically about your upcoming book, because I will say, this confluence of marketing and finance is something that I've got just a really, I love both of those topics, and especially on the marketing side. I know enough to be dangerous in terms of like how manipulative marketing can be.
Sure. And
then I also know, and for the audio listeners right now, you can't judge a book by its cover, but your book cover is so cool. So
well, good. I'm glad you like it. Yeah.
So maybe you can describe for the listeners in 15 seconds what it looks like. But really, I'd love you just to dive a little bit more into the contents of the book itself and why we ought to pick it up.
It's called The Marketing of Debt, How They Get You. It is actually just recently out. And so you can find it online, most any place online that sells books. There have been different books about kind of the psychology of money. And so this is about that, but I wanted to take it an extra step to say, okay, here's where we are most vulnerable and why, but here's how marketers can exploit those vulnerabilities, right? Here are the tactics they use, and this is why they work. So something you were talking about, like a client who would say, well, it was a $500 bad decision. So one of the things I go into is, okay, well, if you're a marketer, you're seeking simplicity and clarity for the things that you think are a benefit, that are attractive, right? But when you get to things that are very complicated and undesirable, like say pricing for these products, you are seeking complexity, right? You're breaking the price up into a bunch of different parts. You're calling the different parts of the price different things. There's an interest rate, right? There's prepayment penalties. There's convenience fees. There's all these things. And so that's what I really wanted to get to, was to take, so here's why we're bad at this, but here's how marketers make it worse. Because that's the stuff that we run into all the time. It applies to things besides finance, but I just kept it in the financial context because, well, I started writing a book and I wanted to finish it. So if I tried to incorporate everything, I'd be writing this for the rest of my life. So that's what the book is about. And, I hope people find it interesting and useful.
That's awesome. We'll send some links in the show notes so people can find that book really easily. Professor John Dinsmore, thank you so much for stopping by Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors.
Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors. If you have a question for Jesse to answer on a future episode, send him an email over at his blog, The Best Interest. His email address is jesse@bestinterest.blog. Again, that's jesse@bestinterest.blog. Did you enjoy the show? Subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you listen. This helps others find the show and invest in knowledge themselves. And we really appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next episode of Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors. Personal Finance for Long-Term Investors is a personal podcast meant for education and entertainment. It should not be taken as financial advice, and it's not prescriptive of your financial situation.